privilege to have this course, Digital Literacies and Language Learning and Technology. He has published widely in this area, and currently he's the president of the Hong Kong Association for Applied Linguistics, and also the president of the Asia Pacific Rim Languages for Specific Purposes and Professional Communication Association. Without further ado, let's warmly welcome Dr. Hafner.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks very much for coming along today. It's great to see so many of you. I'd like also to thank Dr. Wong and Angel for inviting me up here today. It's really a great opportunity for me to think about my research in terms of mobile-assisted language learning, because I'm very interested in language learning and technology. And these days, with all of these ubiquitous mobile devices that we carry around with us, a lot of language learning and technology can also be reinterpreted as mobile learning. And so what I want to do today is tell you about a couple of teaching projects that I've been engaged in. This is the practice part of the talk. And think about how those can be interpreted in terms of mobile learning, because they have definite mobile components to them. Also, to begin with, I'll go through, in the briefest possible way, look at some theory related to mobile-assisted language learning as well. So the basic outline for what I want to cover today is a very brief theoretical background related to mobile-assisted language learning, and then I want to talk about these two different cases. The first case is a teaching project that I've been engaged with for almost 10 years now, and it involves a course in English for Science at City University of Hong Kong, a course where we ask students to create digital videos. That has some mobile aspects to it as students go out into the community, video interviews and video kind of experiments that they create in creating that digital video scientific documentary. The second is a more recent teaching project that I've been engaged in, where I was involved with people from all of the 3 law schools in Hong Kong. So that's one at Chinese U, there's one at Hong Kong U, and there's one at City U as well. And I worked with legal academics to come up with a set of resources, videos about how to write for legal area and how to present for the legal area as well. So that's the basic outline and plan for today. To begin with then, let's take a look at the theoretical background. I want to start with a bit of a story. Now, quite some time ago in my travels around the internet, I came across this story about a physics teacher who was engaging in mobile learning, and it was very interesting what he did. He was, at the weekend, going on a hike, climbed up to a high level, the top of a mountain somewhere, and then he took a picture of the water bottle that he was carrying with him. And he posted it to maybe a Facebook group or some kind of online learning platform, and he asked all his students, what do you think will happen to this bottle when I get to the bottom of the mountain? And then he screwed the cap onto the bottle very tightly and hiked down the mountain again. And by the time he got to the bottom, there were all sorts of answers to his question that he had posted. And what you can imagine what happened, that this happened to the bottle, right? Because of some physical properties related to air pressure that I don't really understand and we won't go into. But the point is that here he was on his weekend with his mobile device with him and thinking about his physics students as he was out and about. And I think this is a really great example of mobile learning, because it shows the way that as teachers we can reach out to students even though it's the weekend or we're off on a hike or something like that, and it allows us then to bring in these ideas that we're encountering in other situations that is not the classroom and make them part of the topic of conversation, right? So one very useful way of looking at mobile learning is to recognize that there are lots of different ways that you can be mobile, all right? And this is from an article by Sharples and his colleagues. When we talk about mobility, one kind of mobility, the most obvious kind, is being mobile in physical space. So I can learn now in the classroom, I can learn on the bus on the way home, I can learn at home as well, because I have access to material to learn in all of those different physical spaces. And what makes it possible to access this kind of mobility is mobility of technology. The fact that we now have really powerful smartphones that can take these really powerful functions and affordances and pack them all together, and they're so small and light that we can just carry them around with us wherever we go. Mobility of technology is also really important. Another thing is what they refer to as mobility of conceptual space. And they say that an adult will engage in maybe up to 8 major learning projects every year. And if you think about it, when we move through our days, we also change our attention from one sort of conceptual topic area to another kind of conceptual topic area as well. So this kind of mobility, the way your attention moves, that's also something that's important to take into account. Another thing is that we learn in lots of different social spaces as well. We learn with our friends, we learn with our family, we learn with our teachers in this kind of a formal setting, and we might learn by encountering experts in informal settings as well. So people are mobile in their social learning as well. And of course learning is dispersed over time. So learning is about making and reinforcing connections, right? Just like the physics teacher taking an idea from class and then showing it to his students as he's out, reinforcing an idea over time. Okay, so I think this is really important. I'm going to come back to this later on. When we look at mobile assisted language learning, the definition for more can be given here. I'll read through this with you. This is from Kukulska-Human, one of the applied linguistics handbooks. She says that MAL is the use of mobile technologies in language learning, especially in situations where device portability, being able to carry it around, offers specific advantages. And the main advantages are ready access to relevant help or information. So you might see a street sign, snap it, and then get a translation or something like that. More flexible use of time and space, adaptation to personal habits, motivations and preferences, and continuity between learning in different settings. Also, greater opportunity for sustained language practice while carrying out everyday activities like walking, waiting, or commuting. So people now with the smartphones that they have can maybe learn a little bit of vocabulary while they're waiting for the bus or something like that, and take that learning into those other spaces. I think this last part is really interesting too here, because she talks about the opportunity for situated learning anchored in a real-world setting, meaning that you can send your students out to engage with the real world, and what I do is get them to take videos of those kinds of interactions, which they can then reflect on later. Okay, so that's so much for the theory, really. Okay, we'll come back to that, those different kinds of mobility. In a little while. You can hear me all right, right? Okay. So I want to start with this first case, which involves the digital video project on a course in English for Science. And as I say, this is a course that I've been running for 9 years now, so nearly 10. And we've throughout been getting students to create digital video scientific documentaries, as well as writing scientific reports. Now, we cater to a large number of different kinds of students. These are them here, so applied biology, chemistry, physics, and so on this particular course. The course is organized around an English for Science project. It's project-based in the sense that we give the students a project to do, and then they have to do 2 things. The first thing they need to do is work in a team, carry out a kind of scientific project, and then report that project, and this is A, as a digital video scientific documentary. And as they're doing that, they're going through a whole lot of different processes here. They need to collect data, they need to do background reading. Because it's a documentary, they need to create a kind of script for that documentary. They need to perform the documentary, sometimes presenting straight to the camera. Sometimes they'll do little role plays and things like that to make it interesting. Then they'll have to edit everything together, and finally what they do is present their video to the class. They upload this video to YouTube, and Then they come into class in a setting like this, and one after the other, similar to a presentation, they'll come up to the front of the room, tap play, and at the end of their video, they'll have a Q&A session. Then the next stage of this project, it's not over yet, is a written scientific report, which is individual work. So the video is group work, and the scientific report is individual work. What they do there is they take the findings from the initial video and they convert that into a written form, writing on their own. Okay, so you have two genres therefore. And here as well, there's a kind of process that they'll be going through when they do that. So I want to give you quite a few examples now of the kinds of topics that we create for students. And we do this sometimes with the help of scientific specialists, and sometimes we just do it on our own. So one example would be this topic on rubbish. Students are asked to measure the amount of rubbish collected by their own individual households and then compare them and try to explain those. Another would be this one called Where Have All the Flowers Gone? This was created by an environmental science and management professor, and it just involves comparing soil in different locations around Hong Kong and doing tests like how acidic it is and that sort of thing. Then this one created by an architecture professor, Structure as Science or Art, looks at the forms that buildings take. In particular, it looks at churches, and students try to understand what is the science behind these kinds of structures. Another one we had was called Shopping, and this was just looking at crowd movements in shopping malls and where do they tend to gather and why. And then we have something called the determination of vitamin C. Now this doesn't mean that vitamin C is very determined. It means that you are trying to measure vitamin C in different fruits, vegetables, and vitamin C tablet solutions and things like that, to try to figure out which is the best source of vitamin C. We have something on noise pollution called What a Noisy World, where students measure the amount of noise in a given environment and then they compare that with people's perceptions of the noise. And finally, something similar with light pollution, where students measured light intensities at different times of the day or night in places like Causeway Bay, Mong Kok, Sai Kung, and this sort of thing. So I've given you a lot here because we actually ran almost all of these topics in one single semester one time, and I'm going to refer back to these topics. But before I do, I want to play one of the videos for you right through. It's about 10 minutes long, so that you can get an idea of what students end up creating.
Hi, this is Victoria Harbour, one of the most beautiful harbours in the world because of the colorful lights decorating the harbour. However, do you know what problem these lights cause? Actually, it is the problem of light pollution. Do you know what the problem of light pollution is? No. Okay. What is that? I don't know.
According to the Hong Kong Night Sky Brightness Monitoring Network, light pollution is a form of environmental degradation in which excessive artificial outdoor lightings, such as street lamps, neon signs, and illuminated signposts, affect the natural environment and the ecosystem. There is a little known on the problems of light pollution to human physiology. However, it is highly possible that people living in the immediate vicinity of neon signposts and sports fields will be annoyed by the excessive illumination.
Light pollution also causes ecological problems. Animals' physiological cycles and movements may easily be disoriented by excessive illumination. For instance, birds may collide with windows at night and may become enchanted by lights at night during their migration. Now, we know that light pollution has a lot of adverse effects to us and to the environment. However, is the level of light pollution similar in different districts? We believe that higher level of urbanization causes more light pollution. We have organized a group of special agents to search for the answer. The simplest instrument to measure light intensity is a phone. The CMOS inside the phone can define the light intensity. The light intensity can be simply obtained by facing the camera towards light sources.
We have selected 4 locations for our study, including Sai Kung, a countryside, Mong Kok and Causeway Bay, urban areas, and Sha Tin, a new town. At night, we will point the light sensor toward the light sources, which face to residential buildings to measure the light intensity. It is because these light sources are highly possible to disturb residents' daily life. We will take several readings in order to take the average. We also measure light intensity at daytime to see whether there will be significant difference between data from day and night. We will also interview residents to see how the problem of light pollution actually affects their daily life, because the numerical value of light intensity may not reflect what the residents feel.
The first location we are going to study is Sha Tin. It is because it is the most populous and well-developed new town in Hong Kong. We hope we can collect information to understand the problem of light pollution in New Town. The major light sources in Sha Tin are the residential lights and the street lamps, and we measured the light intensity there. The light intensity at night time in Sha Tin is 9 lux, which is the lowest among the 4 locations.
I think it's not that serious. I think it's not serious.
Actually, we found that the light pollution problems in Sha Tin are not serious. A process of guiding and controlling the development and use of land are attributed to an ideal residential area. The town planning successfully separates residential area from commercial area. The development of new town brings about a better organized, efficient, and desirable place to live and work.
There are night, big night. In Mong Kok, you cannot escape from light. Mong Kok is a major shopping and retail center in Hong Kong. With the opening of many new shopping malls in recent years, the district has become a hotspot for tourists and local and holiday. Mong Kok is also dining and entertainment center. It has numerous restaurants and entertainment businesses. But one thing we have to note is that there are people living at here. The light intensity at night time in Mong Kok is 520 lux. It's become second among 4.
Maybe it affects my study when,
It's quite serious, yeah. I think sleeping quite serious.
Compared to Sha Tin, the story in Mong Kok is totally different. In a shopping area, high light intensity is understandable, but what actually caused the serious problem of light pollution is that the shopping area does not separate from the residential area. The window of residential house are directly facing to the numerous neon sign and illuminated signboards. By comparing Mong Kok and Sha Tin, we can see the relationship between the problem of light pollution and new town development.
Sai Kung was a fishing harbor, but nowadays it has become a typhoon shelter and attraction. There are numerous seafood restaurants which attract many tourists every year. We can see that there are many neon signs and signboards of restaurants. At night time, Sai Kung has light intensity 30 lux. It is the nearly the last among 4 locations.
Well, I guess it's not as serious as it is elsewhere in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong in general being so densely packed, really it's going to suffer from quite a lot of light pollution. So, I mean, not a good place for astronomers, right? I mean, that's why an astronomy base is hidden out in the far end of the country park, but even there, it's still a lot of light pollution. I think it does affect my life, actually. I mean, sometimes light can be pretty, but I think there's too much.
The result is unexpected. The light intensity is considerable. Probably the growth of tourism light up this harbour. Now we can see the real side here, and here. It's everywhere.
Causeway Bay is also one of the Hong Kong's major shopping districts, as there are many indoor shopping complexes such as Times Square and Soho. Many tourists will live there. We observe that most of the outer surfaces of shopping malls are composed of reflective glass. We measured the light intensity there, and it is 3 times higher than that of the surface of concrete buildings. In Causeway Bay, many shops are open until well after midnight. There are many neon signs and illuminated signboards, and even huge monitors like the one outside Times Square. Do tourists living in Causeway Bay think that light pollution is a great problem?
If you were living here full time, yes, I think so. It's quite bright at night through the windows. We enjoy it as tourists. We come to see the big lights of the city, so we really like it.
The light intensity in Causeway Bay is 550 lux. Although it is the highest, surprisingly, light pollution may not be a problem from the point of view of visitors.
Attractions should be lightened up. Tourists love light. They enjoy to discover more about the city. It is found that the light intensity at daytime can be 20 times higher than that at nighttime. Even there are so many advertisement lightings.
Finally, we can conclude that the urbanization leads to more light pollution. However, how serious light pollution compromises human daily life depends on city planning.
In other words, the problem caused by light pollution can be avoided as long as we have a good city planning.
We hope our video can arise the public awareness of light pollution. Being the light.
Thank you for your interview. How serious do you think light pollution is?
Looking at that, from the point of view of mobile learning, did you notice a lot of different physical locations in this video? Yes. What sort of locations did you notice? So lots of urban scenes, right? You might have noticed that they did some shooting in their own bedrooms right near the beginning, right? Showing how hard it can be to sleep at night and that sort of thing. What kind of people are they talking to when they're doing this? Sometimes they're talking to other people, right? What kind of people?
Visitors, pedestrians.
Great, yeah, like the local residents, the visitors, some expat at one point in Sai Kung, I'm sure he's an expat. And so, and at the very end we see how that can sometimes go wrong because they showed us the bloopers reel and sometimes it was difficult for them to conduct these interviews as well. But the point is that they're moving around in terms of physical locations and actually creating mobile spaces for language learning that are outside of the classroom and that as a teacher I don't have as much control over. We call these spaces for learning, and we say that there are two different kinds. One is non-mediated spaces, those are all the ones that you were just talking about. And on those video topics that I showed you before, you can see that there's lots of different kinds of learning spaces, like a church can be transformed into an English language learning space if students are communicating about their project and what they want to achieve from it using English, okay? And dim the lights down here, we actually saw a campus building rooftop at the end. We had these pictures of Victoria Harbour, we had urban street scenes, interviews with locals and so on. So these are what we refer to as non-mediated learning spaces. But there are also what we call mediated learning spaces, meaning they're computer-mediated communication, okay? And students, when they create their videos, they also set up things like Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups, or they might use email and so on for various different reasons. When they're using email, they may be interacting with group members, but they might also be setting up interviews with people from NGOs or professors or something like that. WhatsApp and Facebook, we tend to, if you look at the language used over here, we tend to get a mix of English and Chinese used in those platforms. But when students use email, they only use English, which is kind of interesting. They also have to consult online databases to find the background information that they need. We have a course blog where they reflect on each other's work and where they post their YouTube videos. And of course there's also the Blackboard learning management system that the students use as well. All of these are kind of online spaces for language learning. Here's an example of a student communicating with an outside expert. What this group did, they were studying soil, and they got in touch with an NGO that they know out on Lantau, and they did a field trip out there. And in order to set up that field trip, this student needed to send an email and get a reply from the leaders of the NGO. So here you've got another kind of space for learning happening, and the student here has a real reason for wanting to write this email, and so it's quite authentic communication. This is an example of the kind of things that we get in WhatsApp. So here you can see students talking a little bit about their project, and you can also see that the interaction begins in Chinese and ends in English. And that kind of code switching is quite typical. Facebook could be similar. So here we see a student posting a video of a bar chart to their Facebook group and getting some feedback from fellow students. The first one, this is just encouraging. This one here is pointing out that the title's missing at the moment, and then the student reverts to Chinese to explain what she's going to do next. So if we look at all of these spaces from a quantitative perspective, we followed a lot of different groups of students over the course of about a year. And we collected a total of, you can see in the corner there, 6,291 messages. So those are WhatsApp messages, email messages, Facebook posts, or whatever. And if we look at the ones that are written only in English, they make up 58% of the total. So I was quite surprised by this. I thought that students would make much more use of Chinese out of class, but in these mediated out of class spaces, they tend to make a lot of use of English. There are some groups that are pretty weak, like this one here, for example. But on the whole, and on average, we actually see a lot of English practice happening out of class on this project in those mediated spaces. If we think about this in terms of mobility, then obviously we have the mobility in physical space that you were pointing to. Students tend to move around the city as they're completing their project, and wherever they go, they're creating learning spaces. This is made possible by the fact that they have their mobile devices and they can record scenes using their mobile phone and that sort of thing. When it comes to mobility in conceptual space, I guess the way that this happens is that they begin by thinking about a problem like light pollution, doing some background research on the internet and so on, and then they translate that into a different conceptual space when they create their video for the lay person to consume. Also, there are many different social spaces that get used in this video project. For example, students will talk to each other, right? Members of their project team. They'll talk to members of their class. They'll talk to people that go beyond their own class as well. They'll also post their video onto Facebook so that their friends can see it. And sometimes their friends will give feedback. And in one case, we've seen a professor liking a video a lot, posting it on his Facebook, and then it gets shared with his family, his friends, and all that sort of thing. So what you're seeing is many more sort of social spaces being created by that project. And if we were to look at the way that students develop their scripts and write their scripts, then we could also see learning dispersed over time with a first draft, a revision, feedback, and all that sort of thing. So I think this project gives a very good idea of how mobile learning can occur and how different mobile learning spaces can be created as well. So another teaching project that I've been doing more recently, we finished this last year, was to create a digital multimedia resource for legal English. In other words, a website with lots of videos on it that tell you how you can write for law or give oral presentations for law. So when we designed this, the website itself looks like this. And you can see from here there are three main areas to the website, three different kinds of videos. And the first kind are expert interviews, and then the types 2 and 3 are related. Those are instructional videos. For the expert interviews, we interviewed people who are professionals in the legal field. Some of them might be new professionals, others were very, very well qualified. For example, the Chief Justice, Jeffrey Ma, gave us an interview, and we used that to create videos. So we asked them things like, what makes good legal writing, according to you? What makes good oral advocacy? This is presenting your case in court. What makes a good process for creating written text or creating an oral argument? And what's your advice to students? So now students can go and they can listen to the Chief Justice giving his ideas about what makes good legal writing, for example. And the other kind of video that we've got here are instructional videos where we have a person presenting to the camera, and then we have various animations to help people to understand things like how to write for law or how to present for law. So it would be things like, how do I write like a lawyer? What is the structure that I should use for particular genres? And what are the language strategies that I can use as well? When we're designing those instructional videos, what we wanted was a unified series of short and engaging videos. So the target length for these is 5 minutes. And the materials themselves should be based on applied linguistic research, so any work that's been done into legal genres, we use that. And we wanted to introduce those key legal genres, and for each series, we organised each one around one single case, one simulated set of facts. So I'll show you a bit more what I mean about that in a minute. For each video, we clearly signposted it with like an introduction, then a body, and then a conclusion that says what you have learned, gives you a kind of review. And we used authentic examples of language and use that as actual student writing. And we visually highlighted the linguistic and discursive structures. Now you'll see what I mean in a moment. We created animations that would highlight relevant grammatical features, for example. Finally, we tried to avoid meta-language or combine meta-language with clear examples. So you don't have to be a linguistics expert to understand these videos. Hopefully you don't have to be a legal expert either, because I'm going to show you an example of one here. Our legal writing series is 8 videos, which begins with an overview. In the overview, we say what our aims are for the series, and we also give one simulated case with a set of facts that we're going to use as an example for the rest of the series. Then we show how legal problem questions, which is the focus genre, can be structured or organised. And then we look at discourse functions, like how do you raise a legal issue in this particular genre? How do you state rules? How do you give support for those rules by either citing precedent cases or citing legislation? And then how do you apply those rules to the particular fact scenario, and how do you conclude? Okay, so the genre that we're targeting here is something called the legal problem question, and in law school, teachers will create a fact situation and then ask students to pretend that they're lawyers and write a advice for people in that situation. Okay, so in the overview, We start with this character here. This is Susan, and she's bought a hairdryer. And she bought the hairdryer from that store, Hair Goods, up there, and the hairdryer was manufactured by this company here, Hair Production Company Limited. And on the hairdryer there was a warning. And the warning said that you must not use the hairdryer with wet hands. So can you guess what happens next in this story? She uses the hairdryer with wet hands, and the result is not very good. This is what happens. Flames start erupting out of the hairdryer. Her hair catches fire, and she's very upset about this. So afterwards, she decides that she's going to sue the seller, and she's also going to sue the manufacturer. And the question that the students will have to deal with is, what kind of legal claim can Susan make against these two other different parties? So we cover all of this in the first episode, and we say this is the scenario that we're going to use to show you how to write an answer to a problem question like this. So I'll show you what episode 2 looks like now. I hope this is accessible. So let's take a look.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Eric, and this is the Quick Guide to Legal Writing. In this episode, we'll talk about how to organize an answer to a legal problem question. By the end of this episode, you'll learn how to organize your answer at the macro level, how to organize at a more micro level, structuring issues and sub-issues by using IRAC in a flexible way. At the macro level, the approach you take will be determined by the design of the problem question. You'll need to think about the facts you are given and the area of law that is involved. A common approach is to organize the answer by legal actions or by parties. Remember our sample problem question, the case of Susan and the exploding hairdryer? Susan was injured when the hairdryer she was using caught fire. She decided to sue both the retailer, Hair Goods, and the manufacturer of the hairdryer, Hair Production Company. Based on this fact pattern, it seems logical to divide the answer into 2 parts, each focusing on a different action, negligence and breach of contract. Each of these actions pits the plaintiff, Susan, against a different potential defendant, and each action raises different legal issues and a different set of rules that you'll have to apply to the facts before you can reach a conclusion. So, once you have decided on the overall macro organization of the answer, you can address individual legal issues using IRAC. As you'll remember from episode 1, IRAC stands for Issue, Rule, Application, and Conclusion. IRAC is a useful tool for presenting legal arguments and is meant to be used in a flexible way. Let's go back to Susan's story again. Have a look at how IRAC can be used to address one of the sub-issues in the negligence action.
Having established the hair production company owns a duty of care to Susan, the next question is whether the hair production company is in breach of that duty. The applicable rule is that manufacturer must take reasonable care in manufacturing a product that is fit for purpose. Donahue and Stevenson, Grant and Australian Knitting Mills. In this case, Susan would argue that the incompatibility of the hairdryer with hair products containing alcohol is a design defect. The reasonable and prudent manufacturer would contemplate that consumers would use a hairdryer alongside other hair products, unless there was a warning not to. However, Hair Production Company did not caution users against using the hairdryer with hair products which contain alcohol. The hairdryer's defect, coupled with the lack of a warning, rendered the hairdryer an unsafe product. Hence, it is likely that Susan would be successful in establishing that, as a manufacturer, Hair Production Company breached its duty of care to consumers.
Here, we clearly see issue, rule, application, and conclusion, in that order. This is the most commonly expected structure. and you should probably use it most of the time. Another possibility would be to foreground the conclusion by placing it immediately after the issue, like this. See? Issue, conclusion, rule, and application. Using this organization emphasizes the conclusion. Still, this isn't the usually expected structure, so you should use it sparingly. Some issues, especially minor sub-issues, do not need a full analysis using IRAC. Take a look at this example.
Third, the damage suffered by Susan must be actionable. In this case, Susan suffered physical injury to her person, which is actionable as part of personal injury.
Here, you can see a sub-issue is resolved in a simple way. Issue first, then conclusion. Okay, let's review. In today's episode, we've talked about organizing your answer at the macro level by legal actions or by parties, organizing the answer at a more micro level by using IRAC in a flexible way. We saw the standard pattern: issue, rule, application, conclusion. A foreground conclusion: issue, conclusion, rule, application. A brief analysis of a minor sub-issue: issue, conclusion. The IRAC strategy is a great place to start, but don't fall into the trap of applying it too rigidly. In the next episode, we'll look at the first move in IRAC, the issue. Stay tuned.
Okay, don't worry if you found that less interesting than the last video. I'm sure that that's to be expected with this kind of dry content. Now, what we've done to evaluate this particular project is quite a bit less actually than the previous project, but we have all of our videos on a YouTube channel. And so YouTube gives us some analytics, and we can look at those analytics in order to understand who is watching these videos. Another thing that we've done is I teach a course in legal English, and on that course in legal English we now use these videos as part of the course, and students are given a discussion forum in our Canvas learning management system, which they obviously can respond to anytime, anywhere, and that sort of thing. So we'll see these videos getting used in the classroom, outside of the classroom, and what I'd really like to see happening is people on the train looking up these videos and learning about legal language as they're going about other things in their daytime. Looking at those channel analytics then, well, this is what we can see at the very sort of top level. We've published altogether 55 different videos. They've been viewed quite a few times now, although one video in particular has attracted about 80,000 views, so the other 54 have about 40,000 between them. They've been liked and disliked. They've been shared around 1,000 times, and we have about 1,800 subscribers in that YouTube channel now. It's interesting to look at where did people come from. So the majority, or not the majority, the largest audience is in Hong Kong, which is good because it means that we're reaching our target audience. But then we also have a substantial number from the United States, the UK, India, and Australia. And these are all places that have common law legal systems, so it makes sense that those people might be interested in it. If you look at where does the traffic come from, then a lot of it comes out of the suggested videos on YouTube. So people are browsing around, they get stuck on some kind of topic related to law, and they get sucked into our channel. It could be from a YouTube search. That means somebody might be looking up something about legal writing or legal language and come across our video. It could be embedded in an external website, and my guess is that most of these references are from our own website, and then there are other ways as well. When we look at the devices, you'll see that the majority are from a computer, over 50%. About 35% are from mobile phones, and then tablets account for maybe 10% or something like that. So it's interesting to see this number here because, as I say, I'm really hoping that students, as they're on their way to university, will take a look at these videos and consume them in this more mobile kind of way. So for this project, when it comes to mobility, we look at the idea of mobility in physical space perhaps a little bit differently, and see how our audience is dispersed right around the world. And as teachers, we're able to engage with a highly mobile kind of a audience. But also, students themselves might be consuming these videos in a mobile fashion as well. Perhaps their teacher is introducing them to it in class, or perhaps they are on public transport or out and about and consuming those videos at that time. And it's the mobility of the technology, of course, that facilitates that kind of a consumption. When it comes to mobility in conceptual space, I'd suggest that this could happen if students, when they're writing their legal problem question answers, refer back to the work that they've done before. So they're taking the concepts that they learned from the video and then applying it in a different kind of a context, namely their law class, and we're getting that mobility in conceptual space. When it comes to mobility in social space, I've mentioned to you that we have some very high-profile lawyers giving interviews on these videos. In a sense, the students are able to have a kind of relationship with those people they wouldn't otherwise be able to have. Not many people get to sit down with the Chief Justice and say, what do you think makes good legal writing? But now, if you're a law student, you can do that, right? So you're creating a kind of relationship, albeit it's a one-way street, with people that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, namely legal experts, and getting their ideas. And finally, learning can also be seen as dispersed over time in this context as well. Hopefully, what they'll do is, after I've introduced my law students to these particular videos, come back to them when they need to write their legal problem question answers. Okay, so I'll just make some very quick conclusions here. First of all, I'd like to point out that digital media and mobile technology have the potential to transform learning experiences, and these can therefore become more distributed across mediated and non-mediated learning spaces, the way that we saw in particular with the English for Science project. Students who are going out into the community but also creating Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups where they create English language learning opportunities. They're more socially distributed as well because students who share their work will share them to various different kinds of social groups, or you can create resources that engage students with the kinds of social actors like the Chief Justice, like a partner in a law firm or something like that, that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. They're more learner-centered because students have to take charge of these opportunities and create these opportunities themselves. They don't have the teacher in the classroom holding their hand and telling them what to do. They need to take their own initiative in their own learning spaces outside of class. So when we're designing mobile learning experiences, what we should do is consider, first of all, when and where learners will use the technology, have some idea about that. So when I created those instructional videos, I really was thinking it would be great if students would look this stuff up on the way to university or something like that. Some kind of easily accessible and therefore short video that they can look at on public transport. There's also this idea of locus of control. This means who is controlling the learning activity. And we need to consider what kinds of support students will need if they're going to be the ones in charge of those out-of-class learning activities. So finally, this idea that students will need some kind of support or structure, and an example of that on our English for Science course is that we give students very clear guidelines about what they need to achieve when with relation to that project that they do. And then based on that structure, students are able to exercise their own agency and create various kinds of learning spaces that are indeed mobile. Okay, thanks very much everybody.
Any questions? Krista?
Professor, I would like to know some very useful and practical applications that we can do on presentations or videos. Yeah, can you tell us some names of the
Sure. So are you talking about video editing suites and that sort of thing? To edit the video?
Like the teacher Eric, he was using a quite fun and interesting kind of thing in the video. Yeah.
Right. So you're talking about the legal English video that I played you, right? With Eric presenting.
Yeah.
So that's more or less a kind of, what I did there was I engaged professionals to create those videos. When we look at what the students are doing, on the other hand, the English for Science project that you saw, what they're doing is, or what we do to help them, is we suggest an app or a program called Power Director, which is a little bit like iMovie for PC, right? iMovie for Windows. Both of those applications are really good in my view. But I have to say I'm not up with that anymore, because in the meantime there are so many video editing, photo editing apps and all this sort of thing. It's so easy now to create filters, and then even video editing has become much, much more accessible. What we do is we tell students that this is our suggestion, and we suggest Power Director, but if you're comfortable using something else, like iMovie or maybe Adobe Premiere Pro, then please go ahead and use something else, because the point isn't that you use the technology that I tell you to, it's that you go out and create a really nice video and you have a good experience with editing it as well. But those are the ones I would suggest. If you ask students, they'll give you lots more.
Chris, I'm just interested, what, I guess, kind of tips would you give people who are going to, say, set those guidelines to support students regarding your recommendation, or at least your considerations for locus of control? Do you have any tips on how we can formulate those things so that we can set up students to succeed?
Right. In the project-based learning environment, so if you're doing a project-based learning course, the whole thing is structured around the project itself. And I find this a really exciting way to work, because you give students the task of creating a digital video scientific documentary. So the very first thing you have to do is start to think about the topic that students are engaging with. They have to think about it too. That means that they need to learn how to access online resources and read critically. So at this stage of the course, near the beginning of the course, we'll have a session on critical literacy, and then we'll do a web quest where they have to find out about their topic, like light pollution or whatever it is. So right at the beginning, we're engaging with the students in a skill that they need in order to be able to do their project. Then there are other things that come along too, like they need to write a script. So we'll do things like view examples of these kinds of short scientific documentaries online, and talk about things like what are the linguistic features that people use in order to engage their audience. You all know them. They're things like rhetorical questions, using the second person to talk directly to the audience, and so on. And so we cover those linguistic things, and we also cover things like visual communication strategies as well. So what you're doing when you have this kind of a project-based learning approach is you are creating a situation where just-in-time learning becomes possible. Students need to do something just at the time that they need to do it. You teach them what it is. So they need to critically read online, be able to search, find, evaluate sources. You teach them that at that point, and then they go and do it. And I think that's a great way to learn. So what we do for these first 7 weeks of the course in particular, when they're creating their videos, is we have a number of milestones that they need to reach. From memory, in week 2, they need to form groups. They need to exchange, social media addresses and things like that, phone numbers, all this sort of thing. By week 4, they need to have collected all of their data. By week 5, they have to have written a script. All this is laid out for them. And it might seem like a bit of a straitjacket, but actually this structure gives them the opportunity to then go into those spaces and create their own learning opportunities as well. So from that example, I don't know if that quite answers your question, but that's how we go about structuring the learning for them. The other example would be the way that we, on Legal English course, set up a forum where they are to discuss the video that they have viewed, and we ask them things like, does that structure that we showed you, this IRAC. Have you encountered that before, and do you write your problem question answers in this way? And then, please respond to these questions and also respond to the other people who have contributed to the forum. So we give these rules and the structure that then allows them to interact with each other, because there are these kinds of expectations. And it's a balancing act between scaffolding the learning process on the one hand, and then once you've done that, letting them go and go out and do their own thing.
Exactly. It's like, how much do you build up for the students, and at what point do they take over?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you can think about that at the beginning of the course, they will always surprise you. All of these mediated learning spaces, email, WhatsApp, Facebook, but I never thought about those at all. And we just said, go and do the project. And students then figured out good ways to communicate with one another. And those good ways to communicate with one another became learning spaces, because some students want to use them that way. Some students say, oh, this is an English project, so let's all use English when we're communicating on WhatsApp. Now that doesn't actually happen that way. There's still, quite a bit of Chinese going on as well. But generally, if you have one person in one of those groups that really wants to learn English, they'll switch the conversation back. Somebody might start a conversation in Chinese, and then it'll get switched into English by a particularly motivated student. And people tend to accommodate to that choice. One thing that we haven't investigated is what's the effect of language proficiency on that, and I suspect there is an effect for that.
Thank you.
So you mentioned students, they find ways themselves to communicate, solve problems. As the teacher, will you play a role as well to facilitate the communication among different groups? How do they communicate across groups?
Right.
What kind of system do you use?
What we do is we have a course blog which is publicly accessible online. And students can post their videos to that blog. Actually, it's the teachers that collect the YouTube links and then embed those YouTube videos into the course blog. And then students are asked to comment on each other's videos. So when they do this, we have maybe 10 classes on the course. The different classes can view each other's videos at that point if they want to. So we provide this technical platform. We are not part of their Facebook groups, we're not part of their WhatsApp groups, except for this research that I've shown you.
Any other questions?
I think the science project, video-based project is very interesting. I would like to know more details about assessment. So I believe that the video will be created as part of assessment. Did students tell you, for example, how many hours or how much time you should devote to create the videos? I think it's very practical. If it's too much time is involved, maybe students are reluctant to do the project.
Right. We sometimes hear students saying that they think the video projects take too much time. So this is definitely an issue for some students. On the other hand, many students, like the ones that you saw, have a great time with the video project and really enjoy it, and they don't seem to mind investing time. They become motivated because it's an interesting and slightly different kind of a task as well. When it comes to assessing it, we ask students, because it is a group work task, we ask students to say which parts of the video, for example, they narrated. So there's a rule that all of the students have to narrate some part of the video, because after all it is an English language project. So we'll check with them which part they narrated, and then we assess it based on the quality of the language that was used and the quality of the presentation, and then also the multimodal strategies that they used, how well they presented things visually and using sound as well. And if I can just think, I think the other category that we use is organisation as well. Was it well organised, basically? Typically, students will get, or one group of students will get 1 mark. But if they report issues like freeloading issues, then that might affect, we might adjust to take that into account.
So individual scores given to each student, overall, or same scores given to all the students?
Generally, yes.
Same
Yeah.
score.
Yeah.
So what is the proportion of the video part?
It's 30% of the course. After they've done it, students write up an individual reflection for another 10% as well, which describes what they think they learned by doing the video project. Generally, if they haven't participated, they find it difficult to do that assignment.
So the final 60% is writing part.
Yeah, the writing's actually 40%, and then there's a 20% quiz.
Oh, so it's learning assessment.
So the rest is individual. 30% group work and 70% individual assessment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think time is up. Let's thank Christoph for a great talk. Thank you. Please fill in the evaluation form and end the class. Thank you very much.